how did a terrorist group come into play? And then they started conquering their mass amount of territories, whether it's in Syria or Iraq.
I think this is the prime time for a terrorist group to come in.
So I want to know what is the current situation between Saudi and Iraq?
I think তোর এই কোয়েশ্চনটা অ্যান্সার করার জন্য very important to understand the geography of Middle East in the first place.
Unfortunately, we don't know our own history yet properly, right? I mean, I think the main thing that people it's not the issue of whether the religion, it's the issue of people, how they misconstrue religion.
I think everyone believed that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was a communist. He in fact had a Bakshal party.
আমরা সবসময় বলি যে I don't care about politics, আমি রাজনীতি নিয়ে না. The professor told you might not.
ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়ার 3 নাকি খুব শীঘ্রই আসতে যাচ্ছে, বিকজ বর্তমানে যদি আমি ওয়ার্ল্ডের কথা চিন্তা করি, কাশ্মীরে যুদ্ধ হচ্ছে, রাশিয়া ইউক্রেনে যুদ্ধ হচ্ছে, রিসেন্টলি ইসরায়েল ইরানে যুদ্ধ হলো, এবং তার থেকেও বেশি মিডল ইস্ট যে একটা রিজন আছে, সেই রিজনে টুকটাক এদিক ওদিক যুদ্ধ লেগেই থাকে, এবং মিডল ইস্ট একটা কমপ্লেক্স রিজন। কিন্তু কথা হচ্ছে ইউনাইটেড নেশনস বা জাতিসংঘের ভূমিকা কতটুকু এই যুদ্ধ থামানোর ক্ষেত্রে। আজকে আমরা সেটাই জানবো আমাদের মাস্টার ক্লাস এপিসোড 4-এ। Right. So recently I watched a YouTube video where the war in Syria and was explained by one of the well-known content creators, which is Pinaki. ঠিক আছে? So সে তার ভিডিওতে বলছে যে সিরিয়ার সিভিল ওয়ার কিভাবে রাশিয়া আর ইউক্রেনের ওয়ারের সাথে কানেক্টেড, রাইট? ভেরি ইন্টারেস্টিং সিনারিও। সো অ্যারাউন্ড 2006-2007 it was a time যেটা অলওয়েজই হয় যে ইউরোপ কিন্তু is a country which faces harsh winter. ঠিক আছে? The entire country was having snowfall, but the entire country was having snowfall and there was like harsh winter. So ওই টাইমটাতে কিন্তু Europe was having this, or more specifically NATO was having this tussle with Russia, ঠিক আছে? And এই harsh winterটাকে থামানোর একটা ওয়ে হইতেছে to have heaters in your room, to have, let's say, boiling waters. Otherwise it's unbearable, no one can even stay there or work there, ঠিক আছে? So Russia is the biggest supply of gas all over the world. And এই gas is that natural resource যেটা দিয়ে হিটিং, তারপর বয়লিং ওয়াটার, ওইসব টেম্পারেচার সব কন্ট্রোল করা হয়। ভেরি ইন্টারেস্টিংলি রাশিয়া যে ইউক্রেনে যে গ্যাস সাপ্লাই দেয়, রাইট, এই গ্যাস পাইপলাইন গোজ টু ইউক্রেন, রাইট, টু ইউরোপ, রাইট? So Ukraine is the transit point that takes the gas from Russia to Europe, right? সো রাশিয়া যখন এরকম একটা ধরেন থ্রেটনিং একটা সিচুয়েশন করলো যে নেটোর সাথে টাসেল হলে ও যে অলওয়েজ বলে যে আমি কিন্তু গ্যাস বন্ধ করে দেবো, রাইট? তখন ইউএসএ টোল্ড ইটস অ্যালাইজ যে স্টার্ট লুকিং ফর অল্টারনেটিভস, অ্যান্ড ওয়ান অফ দ্য বিগেস্ট অল্টারনেটিভস কেম ফ্রম কাতার। কাতার বলছে যে বিনিথ কাতার দ্যার ইজ দিস গ্যাস ফিল্ড অর গ্যাস আউটলাইন উইচ হ্যাজ বিন ফাউন্ড, যেটার 2/3 কাতারের কাছে, 1/3 ইরানের কাছে, রাইট? So Qatar proposed যে there should be a gas pipeline যেটা কাতার থ্রুতে স্টার্ট হবে, টার্কিতে ট্রানজিট হয়ে সিরিয়া থ্রুতে যাবে হচ্ছে ইউরোপে, রাইট? And that was a great initiative, right? When Russia heard this, Russia went to Syria and told that since 1/3 is owned by Iran, accept Iran's proposal, right? And the conspiracy theory is the war in Syria more or less started because of that entire like gas pipeline and all that concept, right? And so a lot of people, in his video he said that Turkey played a big role in Syrian Civil War, right? So ওইখানে টার্কির রোলটা কি ছিল তাহলে? ওকে, কাতার বুঝলাম, ইরান বুঝলাম, সব বুঝলাম, but what is the role of Turkey? So the pipeline route that Qatar proposed, ওইটাতে কিন্তু টার্কি থেকে ট্রানজিট ছিল, আর ট্রানজিট মানেই টাকা, রাইট? কিন্তু দ্য পাইপলাইন রুট দ্যাট ইরান প্রপোজড, যেটা সিরিয়া অ্যাকসেপ্ট করছে, there was no like transit point in Turkey, right? So basically what he's trying to tell যে all these like geopolitical problems and wars যেটা আমরা দেখি, সেটা যতটা কমপ্লেক্স মিডিয়া বলে হয়তো অত কমপ্লেক্স না, like that's sort of like a conspiracy theory from his end. What are your take on it?
Acha, I'll go first. You go first. So basically, this person that you're talking about,
Right.
With a credential key,
He's an analyst, like, or YouTuber.
with a background in what? Okay, so basically it's a social media content commentator.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's one of the big gaps that happens with like, especially if your primary source of getting people's reach is usually on YouTube or Instagram. Yeah, আমাদের অনেকগুলো বাংলাদেশ হতে আছে. You have you have all these different types of newspapers who call themselves journalists, right? They will try to conflate a lot of facts that are happening in order to get a lot of views.
Right.
So, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, a particular যে content creator সে মনে হয় কলকাতা থেকে, or কি বাঙালি? Bangladeshi. Okay, so that's
living in France.
living okay. মানে it also checks out Turkey in a sense that like South Asian যখন political analysis থাকে, particularly international relations, I think oftentimes দেখবো যে ওরা হচ্ছে nuance গুলা avoid করে. So বাংলাদেশে তো অনেক think tank আছে, ওখানে অনেকগুলো স্কলার আছে. If you see যে একটা ওদের ইন্টারভিউ ওরা কেমনে কথা বলে versus this personality you're talking about is very different.
But then he did mention sources, Kinto. In the video, he mentioned explicit sources, such as Journals of America, who talked about the gas line politics or gas pipeline conflict.
I will agree with Shubham here. See, Pinaki Bhattacharya is a Bangladeshi and he is a very renowned, he's actually himself a scholar in international studies as well.
Right.
And interim government, his name was proposed to be the foreign ministry advisor.
Right.
Yeah. Because he takes on these things. But
Right.
like Shubham said, regardless of this, he's a very controversial character, right? His credibility is always at question by the current political status quo of our country, right? The word I am looking for is, it's just on the tip of my tongue. Okay, যখন এটা আমার মাথায় আসবে আমি বলবো. So yeah, you use the word conspiracy theory, right? But I think it goes back to, this far-fetched idea, this attempt to, connect to things that might not be that connected.
But এখানে I have this one take, ঠিক আছে? ধর Syrian war এর কথা আমি যদি ফার্স্টে বলি, why did the war start? The war started because there was this vendor in Tunisia who was called Mohammed Bouazizi, ঠিক আছে? He was a vendor. ওকে যে পুলিশ বলছে যে তোমাকে এখানে ভেন্ডিং কার্ড করতে দিব না, ওই যে টিপিক্যাল গভর্নমেন্টাল
Set himself on fire.
set himself on fire. Arab Spring started. Order port the Ben Ali's government in Tunisia fell. Hosni Mubarak's government in Egypt fell. Muammar Gaddafi's government in Libya fell and went to Syria. That is where a civil war started. But how did these foreign countries get into this?
It's also hard to imagine. Okay, so for example, let's break it down, right? So let's start off with your proposition about Turkey. Right. So তুমি যে pipeline কথা বলতেছো. So Europe through is called the Nord Stream pipelines, right? Like stream 1 through 4. Right. And I believe Russia যখন attack করছে the 2 and 4 অনেক, if I'm not mistaken, 2 and 4 are particularly damaged, I say.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is like Turkey has always had a vested interest in Syria in the sense that ওখানে Kurds আছে.
Exactly, that's what I was.
So এটা কেন বলতেছি because the Kurds are like a rebel movement within Turkey that try to like delegitimize Erdogan's regime. So ওদের তো interest থাকবে. Similarly, it's the same case if for some reason the Bangladesh intelligence community were to find out that Myanmar was using the Rohingyas to, start a rebel movement here. So obviously আমাদের থাকবে, interest থাকবে, ওদেরও interest থাকবে, right?
But just to add a follow-up question to Turkey is যে okay, Turkey and Kurds had these crises and these conflicts from years on, ঠিক আছে? Even before the Syrian Civil War started, right? What if that's the case? We also know that during the time of Syrian Civil War, these Kurds were funded by USA, right?
Yeah, so
where does their alliances actually fall?
That's what I'm trying to get at. So the thing is, like, when you're trying to look at the Syrian Civil War, you have to analyze everything, all the layers together. So for example, what you're doing is তুমি একটা জিনিসকে single out করে দেন আরেকটা লেয়ার হঠাৎ করে ঢুকাই দিছো. That's not what's happening.
Right.
Arab Spring হইতেছে এখানে আরো 10টা জিনিস হচ্ছিল. Not just in Syria, in and around Syria.
Right.
Bashar al-Assad's যে internal disagreement হইতেছে within his cabinet এটাও হচ্ছিল. So it's a very prime environment in Syria at that time to have a rebellion. Wait, I'm coming. তারপর হচ্ছে যে এই টার্কির কথা যে বলতেছে, ওদের Syrian Turkeys have had a like long-standing মানে diplomatic constraint যেটা বলে in the sense of like এই যে Kurdish, right? So একজন like okay, so you also brought up the Qatar issue, right? So the Saudis call Qatar is terrorists. এরকম অনেকে yeah, and as you see, I'm pretty sure you're going to mention Saudi Arabia who comes into this conflict. You're mentioning the United States বাদেও তো আরো অনেক factors আছে। ইরানও তো পরে আসাদকে সাপ্লাই করছে, right? Russia also came in, so I'm sure we're going to get into that, but the main point I'm trying to make is that conspiracy গুলো debunk করার at a very simple way is looking at all the layers together. So যে ইউটিউবের কথা বলছো যখন এই assertion গুলো দিছে, it's like a very মানে I want to say like কয়েকটা সুতাগুলোকে উঠে ওগুলোকে একসাথে like জট লাগে একটা string বানাইছে, but that doesn't show you like whether the actual yarn itself has
And to add to Shubha, the Syrian Civil War is probably of till a 21st century, I would argue, the most complicated war to explain to someone.
Right.
Russia-Ukraine is at least easier because it's Russia-Ukraine. The Syrian Civil War had so many actors in it. It is actually responsible for the resurgence of ISIS, right?
Right.
So that is when the ISIS factor also came in, right? এখন যদি আইসিসের উইটা দেখি আবার that's another history. I'm sure we'll get back into it. So interstate conflict, intrastate conflict বলে জিনিস আছে, right? So this was an interstate conflict because it brought in proxies from so many sides because everyone was like, okay, I have to capitalize on this situation.
but it didn't start off like that কিন্তু
It didn't start like that.
While we're at it, let's, to anyone who's watching this, right, let's explain the Syrian Civil War. What is the war? Let's try and simplify it যতটা সম্ভব, যতটা possible.
So basically, like you said, Tunisiaতে it started. তারপর আস্তে আস্তে সবগুলোতে জায়গায় they were toppling down, but Bashar al-Assad's regime cracked down on its opponent hard, right? To the point যে আচ্ছা তখন rebel forces create হওয়া শুরু করছে anti Bashar al-Assad's regime.
and not just like rebel forces as in this protesters, they কিন্তু army থেকে
ওরা militias.
The army even broke apart and then added to the Free Syrian Army.
তারপরে even Free Syrian Army even deep down into the conflict ওদের ভিতরে আবার factions হওয়া শুরু করছে, people who had different visions as to how they can counter Bashar al-Assad.
So a rebel একটা faction যে যেটা বলছে ISIS হয়ে গেছে।
ISIS হয়ে গেছে।
See, basically like the important thing I want to highlight before Alice continues is that it কিন্তু একটা interested issue থেকে শুরু হয়েছে,
right?
Within the you can argue the Arab Spring influenced a lot of the things that happened, but it কিন্তু completely initially began within Syria between the people versus Bashar al-Assad and his regime, right? That's how it like initially like starting point.
It had a good motive, right? You wanna on paper you wanna bring out a dictatorial regime. On paper it looked good, but
I want to highlight one point. ঠিক আছে, so let's say there was this uprising against a dictator because her unemployment ছিল, corruption ছিল, আরো অনেক practices ছিল which shouldn't have been there. ঠিক আছে, এই জন্য common people said okay, যেরকম আমাদের দেশে হয়েছে, let's have this uprising and take down this dictator. All right?
right.
How did a terrorist group come into play? And then they started conquering their mass amount of territories, whether it's in Syria or Iraq.
I think
we can এটাতে একটু পরে আসি।
actually also for the viewers, this is the prime time for a terrorist group to come in. All the conditions are set.
All the conditions are set. Okay, fine. You have a political vacuum, right? The legitimacy of Bashar al-Assad is severely questioned, right? Who is he? But that's the environment a terrorist organization would thrive in chaos, right? That's when, like you said, Russia has been a long-standing ally of Syria, the Eastern Bloc, right? Then you have your US, Jara, we have to bring down the regime, right? With their democracy and whatnot. I think on a grand scheme of things, what most people fail to realize, it's a very simple thing, but I think most people fail to realize is Middle East, at the end of the day, is a modern Cold War between US and Russia. I would argue as
Or Saudi and Iran.
That's what it would look like on surface, but I would also so far argue that, in a way, yes, Saudi and Iran are the main characters, but it's US and Russia.
I would disagree, but I'll let you finish.
Yeah. So the reason I say this is because আমার সবসময় বলি US interferes in the Middle East. US interferes in the Middle East, right? ওদের hegemony ওখানে ওরা establish করতে চায়, what not. রাশিয়াকে কি আমরা অতটা অ্যাক্টিভ দেখি? না. I would say Russia is not entirely it's not like ওরা pro freedom, pro this. They're anti-US. You get the difference, the distinction here. That's what they're trying to counter, right? So anyways, coming back to the main thing.
But I also want to highlight some reasons why USA actually got into the war. I was also in accordance with them. They actually had points, but go ahead.
হ্যাঁ ওইটাতে তো আমি আসতেছি সো দ্য রিজন আই ব্রট দিস আপ ইজ আচ্ছা সো লং স্ট্যান্ডিং অ্যালাই অ্যান্ড ইউ হ্যাভ ইউএস তো তারপরে যখন দেখতেছে যে এই যে লাইক আই সেড লিবিয়া তিউনিসিয়া সব ফলিং ডাউন অ্যান্ড রাশিয়া অন দি আদার হ্যান্ড ইজ লুজিং ইচ অফ হিস চেস পিসেস দেয়ার অ্যালাইজ that's when Russia had to, because Russia-Syria relation, like you also highlighted, it goes way back, right? Because Syria-Iran relation is very good as well, right?
There is also a reason for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, fair, but it's I think to just label this as like, oh, my ally is here and I need to counteract my opposition. It could be like outdated idea.
Obviously, it's more nuanced.
Yeah, but I think outdated kind of this is because for Russia they also have a base there.
Right.
They have a base there. That's way more of a bigger reason to be invested in Syria than like, oh, I need to oppose the United States. Yeah, that is obviously money for your purposes of soft power or for your purposes of, you're keeping your regional influence intact. Yeah, but I think the way, let's say, Ali described course, like, oh, I have vested interest to counteract. I think it's stake gulo hoche actually Saudi Arabia, Iran are more important because for Iran to have a very isolated economy. Right. So they need allies way more than Russia needs allies right there. Similarly for Saudi Arabia, because they're trying to have like a regional hegemony, and like we'll get into that eventually. So yeah, so essentially just to point off of Ali.
So after finish, for anyone who's watching, and this is what the facts say. So Syria essentially was a country that was divided into like two Muslim factions. Acta was the Sunni and Acta was the Shia. These were the two main factions. Shias were actually the minority. Even though Bashar al-Assad himself was a Shia, his father was a Shia, and they went to power. Actually, they call themselves the Alawites, but they come from the Shia community. Eventually, right? So that Shia actually got the backings from Hezbollah, who were backed by Iran. So that's where the allies there.
Yeah.
And since Iran was there, Saudi was also thinking, Gacha, now I think I should support the rebels or the Free Syrian Army at that point of time. Around, I think, 2012 or 13, I'm not so sure, Assad apparently used like chemical weapons on its citizens.
Apparently, this is true.
Let's say from other sources, apparently used.
It is true. There is no
If Assad used chemical weapons
not once
on its citizens, which gave grounds for USA to formally enter the war in Syria.
Okay,
and
that's it.
You can have your take on this, right? So USA said that like Barack Obama, who is the president, which commented this is absolutely not acceptable. That was a line he shouldn't have crossed.
And I remember, and I quote, he said, it is within the interest of American people.
I was gonna say, yeah, he didn't say that is he specifically mentioned the grounds as to why the war should be involved, right? Because it's a national security threat.
So that's how USA got into the war. But here's where the interesting part starts. Assad, knowing that he's now the target and seeing what happened to, let's say, Gaddafi or let's say Saddam Hussein when NATO or the other countries entered Iraq in 2003, also there were weapons of mass destruction, and it was taken that they actually entered. So he sort of saw his fate in a way coming. Tokon he started releasing like prisoners who were essentially terrorists in mass numbers, right?
Yeah.
And that is where the entire ISIS boom and everything started. And oiter reason Russia actually entered or started airstrikes.
Very good. Very
now. You watched the Vox video, good job. Yes. So yeah, they released prisoners, but cannot go set up. Because prisoner gula eventually radicalized hobe. Right. So you wanted to take the target away from the rebels are now going to be the radicalized jihadists. It a narrative to push rebel to bhago initial ISIS to hoist.
Also there comes another argument to this prisoners were trained back by CIA. In the past.
We're coming to that, but I'm saying the principle, that's
that's the idea.
Yeah, so cool. I guess if you're Bashar al-Assad, that was a tactical genius move. You shifted the target, like the US target, from your back to, the rebels, right?
Hence ISIS can be
quite very, I would say, very academic questions. For anyone who's watching who needs knowledge, Syria war কিন্তু একটা জিনিস আমরা বারবার শুনছি, war crimes, right? What is war crimes? Like you two have a lot of UN knowledge. So what is a Geneva Convention and what is a war crime?
Well, to be specific, you don't have to have UN knowledge to know what a war crime is. That actually,
people may not be aware of this.
Yeah. Okay, so I will let the person who actually went to Geneva talk about the Geneva Convention, and then I'll come to what a war crime is.
The Geneva Convention is an international instrument. We call it an instrument since it's not a law per se. It's an international instrument with 4 additional protocols to it that outlines the laws of war. Yes, for the viewers, there are laws to war as well. You like
International humanitarian law.
international international humanitarian law. The 4 additional protocols stipulates as to laws on land, by air, by sea. All right, and they say some basic laws are you cannot kill a innocent civilian or a disabled person, women and children. But when you do those things, those are the things that basically amounts to war crimes.
Yeah. So to build off of that more, so international humanitarian law is basically the international convention, the agreement under which states who have signed or ratified an international humanitarian law legislature, how they stipulated this is how we're going to conduct warfare. So it's the law of conflict যেটা আমরা বলি most of the time. And yeah, so many things এখানে abide করতে হয়. So for example, when you are both the term is belligerent states, so both of you guys are opposing each other, so you have to like this area target করবা ওই এরিয়াতে তো obviously civilians থাকবে, right? So it like you cannot target civilians, you have to ensure যে তোমার একটা military target করতে হবে. And let's say if for some reason you're going to use lethal force যেটা বলো, okay, in this case let's say chemical weapons, it has to be the maximum force you can be using is the least amount of force required to obtain your goal. So এর বেশি করতে পারবে না. So these type of stipulations থাকে. তোমরা prisoners of war কিন্তু তুমি torture করতে পারবে না. These are like different things that are stipulated under international humanitarian law, and anything like when you violate these terms এগুলোকে war crimes হিসেবে বলে. Okay. Yeah. And so you'll hear that term of Israel is committing war crimes, right? So this is how we stipulate all of them. Yeah.
Follow-up questions. Yeah. So another thing which I really wanted to talk about, something which has also been brought, is WMD, weapons of mass destruction.
All right.
Again, like school us. What is WMD?
Weapons of mass destruction basically refers to mostly nuclear or chemical weapons. I feel like if I'm mistaken, Shubham, in my
Biological as well.
and biological as well, that can destroy a population in part or in its entirety.
Right.
So in a nutshell.
Right.
So the position of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical or biological, I think that's it. And why it's harmful, because obviously you don't have to be an Einstein. It can kill a population in its entirety or in part.
So mass, it's like, I think the word itself kind of gives you weapons of mass destruction, right? So একটা হচ্ছে mass destruction in the case of like the scope of it, like তুমি কত মানুষ মারতেছো, very high scope of casualty যেটা বলে,
right?
And the other thing is like the longevity of the scope of the death, meaning like not just like, let's say if you use biological, chemical or nuclear or radiological, but with the nuclear weapons, the after effects of that last way longer, as we have seen from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even econo হচ্ছে ওর effects থাকে. So this is what would characterize weapons of mass destruction: widespread nature of the deaths in terms of numbers, and also the long-term effects.
Right. Since I think we are well into this like podcast, like I have with me like 2 very good UN experts. I would say, there's Shubham Borua. He has been here in our previous episode, the first episode, and Islam Alif. He has also been here from our previous episode. And these are pro-monners. So for Yuhan, who's very academic, like these 2 are the pro.
I will not rather prefer the term UN nerd. I will accept that gracefully.
I want to know about your UN experience, the real UN experience. You need to ball.
Yeah, Alif.
Okay, so I guess
Those Alif could ask. No, the ladies first. They don't have questions in there. That's a well.
I guess my first UN experience dates back to my working with UN ODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes. I worked on a trafficking and smuggling project.
Right.
So and obviously I'm a student of criminology, so I guess that's where my inspiration also comes from, to work with UN ODC, where I got to work with drugs and all of this. And my second experience was last year, when I exactly around this time, exactly a year ago, when I became the first Bangladeshi to attend the graduate studies program in UN headquarters in Geneva. So it was a very nice program, and you wanted to know about the UN experience, the real UN experience. And I'll tell you this right off the bat. It sounds fancy. it is fancy, it pays well, everything. But at the end of the day, it is a desk job for a lot of people. I'm not saying very subjective one saying for a lot
Like any other job.
right, like any other job.
Desk job.
I feel like the real fun part of UN that people feel যে আচ্ছা okay এই জন্য আমি UN এ কাজ করতে চাই is when you work in UN field offices. I feel like in conflict zones, although those are much more detailed কিভাবে conflict zones and everything. I think that's what people aspire to be, but not everyone gets deployed to a conflict zone right away or on a humanitarian mission. আমাদের দেশে যেটা আইডিবি ভবন, আমি যখন ওখানে ছিলাম, at the end of the day আমারও একটা বস ছিল, আমি কাজ করতাম, আমার ডকুমেন্টস প্রিপেয়ার করতে হতো, একটু ভিজিটে টিচার্সদের যাইতাম, a lot of meetings, right? On the face of it, yes, it sounds very fancy, and it is, do not get me wrong, you get to meet a lot of people, but I guess that's why people are drawn to it. But I guess there comes a time where people, and I'm Shubham might have a similar different day, people eventually realize, you know what, okay, it is not as fancy as I thought it would have been.
I mean, you have to go to the UN HQ first if you want to see the fancy.
So Sumo always gives this mic drop answers. ঠিক আছে একদম like তুই গেছিস সৈয়দে এখানে আমি UN HQ তে
A funny thing, Shubham went to UN New York. I went to UN Geneva. New York and Geneva ভিতরে কিন্তু একটা খুবই like there's a very funny tussle. There's a very funny tussle between UN and Geneva because Geneva is considered to be soft power. The humanitarian organizations অনেক বেশি, যদি সোজা বাংলায় বলি লুথা যেটাকে, আর নিউ ইয়র্ক is where Security Council is, আর Geneva is where Human Rights Council is. এখন let's be honest, Security Council is more valid. Okay.
We'll get into that. Unfortunately, I've adopted that mindset.
Now, we actually met in a UNSC like MUN committee for
And I was on top there as well. So but like jokes aside, I think so my first interaction of the UN was giving a speech at the UNHQ, which was for actually a Amal UN conference. Like Bangladesh Whoa. So it was actually on the invitation of the president of the General Assembly at the time. She had a massive initiative on like promoting youth participation. So ওখানে সব ইউনিভার্সিটি পার্টিসিপেন্ট একটা স্পিকার বলছে এসডিজি নিয়ে কথা বলতে, তো আমি ওখানে এসডিজি 1 no poverty, which is very relevant to Bangladesh, ওখানে ফার্স্ট স্পিচ দিয়েছি। Then the second time was we had a visit from my university to the rapporteur on African affairs. So our professor, he's Nigerian but also works for the Nigerian government, also very big time independent scholar for the UN.
Right.
So ওইভাবে শুরু হয়েছে। And then I did some work with the same office for a year, and then also recently I was a youth envoy at the UN Economic and Social Commission's Youth Conference. ECOSOC Youth Conference 2025. Yeah, you saw my cool video. So, and I think like the glory and the shimmery lights that people see, that's mainly in New York, because we have the headquarters.
Yeah.
The location is also prime real estate. They don't know like Donald Trump would
I see over Geneva.
It depends. If for example, I'm a student.
Hey, he got a cool hat as well.
No, এটা কেন বলতেছি, it's like Geneva is like soft power বলে, it's because they deal with like the international norms, like international law oriented, but like anything related, even the ICJ, right? Like all the tribunal. So if you're someone who's into like public international law specifically,
right,
that's the place to be. And if you're like a nerd like me, I would love to be in Geneva and learn so much, right? But if you're someone that's like more like you want to do more work and take us like meaningful work, so all the major like UNDP বল এগুলোর সব মেজর অফিসগুলো কোথায় হলো, তো নিউ ইয়র্কে থাকে। HQ তে না থাকবে, HQ আশেপাশে আছে। So like it's all based in New York. So like when you want to meet like high impact individuals, that's probably in New York. So এটাতে আলিফকে বলবো যে
And you have all the missions there.
Yeah, all the missions there as well, right beside the headquarters. So like if you go there, ওখানে like because since I was at the conference, I'm a different embassy বা like different missionও গেছিলাম. So if you want to see the bright lights, it's in New York. But a lot of it is a desk job.
Right.
For example, like I feel like at this age we have to get field experience. So that is how it is, right? So before I want to work at the UN, or if I work for the UN, I want a posting somewhere outside of New York actually. So kind of get like you can. Yes. So that's our experience at the United Nations.
Okay. So আমরা কিন্তু মিডল ইস্ট নিয়ে কথা বলা স্টার্ট করেছিলাম। মিডল ইস্ট as we know is actually a very complex region বলতে পারি, রাইট? বাট মিডল ইস্টে দুইটা মেজর প্লেয়ার আছে, একটা হচ্ছে সৌদি আরবিয়া আর একটা হচ্ছে ইরান। and most of the wars, whether it's the Yemen war, whether it's the war in Syria or in any other region, ওদের কিন্তু সবসময় কোনো না কোনো স্টেক থাকে, right? So I want to know what is the current situation between Saudi and Iran, and how are they influencing whatever is going on in Middle East right now?
Before that, a lot of people have this conception যখন মিডল ইস্ট ভাবে যে ইটস মানে সাবকনসিয়াসলি ভেবে নাকি মিডল ইস্ট একটা আরেকটা কন্টিনেন্ট। আই থিঙ্ক মিডল ইস্টের অনেকে ভেবে নাই যে মিডল ইস্ট মেবি একটা রিজিয়ন, ঠিক আছে? হ্যাঁ, ইট ইজ এ রিজিয়ন মিডল ইস্ট, কিন্তু আই থিঙ্ক তোর এই কোয়েশ্চেনটা অ্যান্সার করার জন্য very important to understand the geography of Middle East in the first place.
Right.
Western Asia, Northern Africa, all right?
Right.
So it's very important because it's part of Asia too as well. And I think most people fail to realize that.
Right.
This geographical implication, অনেকে এটাকে মিডল ইস্টকে একটা আলাদা isolated region ভাবে. And I think that is a issue because that brings in a lot of misunderstandings.
Right.
You asked about another thing before I come to Saudi and Iran. A lot of it, the things we see today in Middle East in 2025 leads back to colonial legacy as well. And a lot of it, what is happening in Middle East, like many things in this world, has to do with the after effects of colonialism. All right? The Israel-Palestine conflict being the prime example, right?
Right.
We will get to it, I'm sure, the Balfour Declaration and whatnot. Saudi-Iran conflict. Saudi was founded very recently. I mean, এখনো 100 years হয় না, I think around 1930s.
Right.
So yeah, so 1930 আসলো ওরা
House of Sauds.
House of Sauds, right? ওরা এত কিন্তু impactful at the time ইভেন ছিল না তো,
Right.
ঠিক আছে? তো ওরা তারপর আস্তে আস্তে উঠলো। তারপরে the thing is যখন ইরানের let's talk about pre-1979 Iran revolution, যখন ওইখানে একটা some would say US propped up dictator ছিল, right? তখন you will see, oh, pre-1979 Iran was in utopia, এখন তো মহিলারা বোরকায় আছে, right? Okay, you will see this idea.
Right.
Around that time,
I think the guy was called Reza Shah.
yes.
If there's a real try,
Yeah, so around that time, and I'm sure Shubham will chime in here in a while, তখন না OPEC, oil market, অনেক কিছু
Right.
ঝামেলা হয়েছে due to Israel. তখন Egypt nationalized their own oil supply. And as a result,
Iran.
it was Iran.
Yes.
Yeah, it was Iran that nationalized their oil supply, right? তারপর থেকেই কিন্তু ওই জায়গাটা থেকেই তোর post 1979 we could see the sort of start of modern conflict as we know it.
Okay.
ঠিক আছে? হ্যাঁ।
Yeah. So pretty. I think like to answer the question in a more like recent context. Obviously colonial legacy definitely has it. But like for let's say the layman, the more I think important thing to know is like Iran after the Islamic Revolution and Saudi Arabia, Islamic Revolution porage of the relationship, that's more pertinent to the current.
It's more on the course of the life.
Yeah. So the first thing that I mean, historical disclaimer is mostly that Iranians are actually Persians.
Yeah.
Okay, or historically Muslim. Okay, Israel was actually more of a, I don't want to say invasive force. It's not, but it's more of like a foreign force. And influence is obviously chilo. Eta amaderও ছিল, right? Like Indian support na hare. But like even in our region, Islam kintu asche not as like a natural force. It like Mughals are truth like or conversions with it. So similarly, same thing happened in Iran, right? Iran, and if you go to Iran actually, or if you meet Iranians, or kintu their identity Persian is first of all, right? Like they are like it like a Persian ball of it. Yeah. So why is that relevant? Islamic Revolution. Now you have, because after that you have a Shia dominated country, the first and only in the world. Right. So now what do you have? You have the other sect of a very conservative Islam, like Shia there, and then you have Saudi Arabia that follows Wahhabism, obviously other like
The Sunni Muslim.
yeah, but like Wahhabism are to my Sunni Muslim are two conservatives, right? So now you have two. It's funny, I don't want to say they're opposing forces, but somehow, some way in this conflict, they're considered of opposing forces.
Yeah.
Right? Even though like, if you read like the Quran and everything, you can like, or like similarities I say, even though like, divide to say, right? So that's one. So
Is this essentially a Sunni-Shia conflict?
it's an ideological conflict. And in that ideology, unfortunately, Sunni Shia'টাকে time করা হয়.
আচ্ছা।
So it's not a religious conflict. Even the Israel-Palestine conflict is a religious conflict না। That's on land. এটা ideologically, but unfortunately, ideological conflict হচ্ছে তোমাকে এগুলো tag করে দেওয়া হয়েছে।
Right.
Right. And that's like I think for the viewers, this is the more important thing to take away from this discussion, right? So yeah, first you have, like, let's say you have this split Sunni Shia influence. That's one of the ways they try to justify it. The second is actually like the proxy influence that they need, where both হচ্ছে একটা regional hegemony করতে চায়. From Iran's point of view, you are
But just to interrupt, for anyone who's watching, what is a proxy war?
a proxy war is basically you are kind of fighting your adversary, but not on your own geographical space, but in a different nation. As simple. Through other parties. Could be a third party, like let's say a rebel group, terrorist group who is not a part of a government, or it could be backing a government itself.
সিম্পলি ঝামেলা হয়েছে এলাকায় বড় ভাইকে বলছি গ্যাঞ্জাম করতে আরেকজনকে পাঠাইতে
Yeah, exactly. Very simple. It's very simple, yeah. So ওদের এখন proxy influence there. এখন এটা কেন হচ্ছে এত like polarized, but like why is it so intense? So একটা হচ্ছে Saudi Arabia তো কিন্তু Middle East long term বড় ভাই basically. But Iran is the new Iran, as I said, post-Islamic revolution Iran is the new upcoming force, right? ওদেরকে the military অনেক strong. Yeah, but they need friends in the region. So how do you make friends? You try to help people who are in need, and then you become friends, right? Like, not friends, literal friends, but friends through mutual interest. So ওরা হচ্ছে এখন কি করতেছে, দেখতেছে যে like আচ্ছা আমাদের তো একটা ideological opposition আছে with Saudi Arabia, and then we're going to support the people they don't support, or the adversary they can support, right? And then through these various ventures, Saudi ventures in a country, and then Iranian ventures in a country as well, which is the opposite, you have all this tension building up. And this is like the একটা layer bullshit. And then you take another layer where they're both also friends with Western or East. Yeah, I mean Western ironically bullshit because historically Russia always wanted to be part of the West, right? But এখন তো ওরা হচ্ছে না history West. So yeah.
I think just to top off what Shuham said, I think modern day conflicts একটা বড় part Gulf War. Gulf War was the trigger in the 19s.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean it's just like
the most simplified.
Yeah, the ideological point is what I think most people need to grasp. Because like সবাই অনেক কিছুতে religion টা খুব like ঢুকাই দিত because it's easy.
See, even I don't think even Saudis or Iranians would even suggest it religious. ওরাও বলবে যেটা ideological. আমরা বলে এটা.
But Zika, it's an academic which is very important, Jay.
Yeah.
Saudi is not the only country which opposes Iran, right?
No.
Recently, we have seen what happened between Israel and Iran, right? So I want to know, why did this strike happen in the first place? And for anyone who's watching, why does even Israel think Iran is a threat?
Multitudes of reason. See, Iran is that one specific quote unquote bad apple from the Middle East. Like Middle East সবাই কিন্তু এটা একটা মুসলিম ভাই যেটা ইরান কিন্তু অনেক segregated from the rest of the Middle Eastern community, ঠিক আছে, from the other Muslims as well, like Shubham said, due to ideological conflict, ঠিক আছে.
Yeah, or they're also separated because of nuclear development
Programs as well,
right? We'll come to that, right?
We'll come to that as well. Iran always has had this idea that death to Israel, quote unquote.
Why?
Simply because they see Israel's occupation, obviously like the rest of us, as illegal. They do not believe in the establishment of a Jewish state. There's a very different, there's a difference in between saying that Israel being occupying the land illegally and Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. They're taking very different terms, all right? Okay. See, a lot of people will argue that Israel is occupying illegally, but not a lot of people will agree that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. So that is where Iran has come, because which is post 1945, 6-day war, the Intifada, the Nakba. Over the years, অনেক Arab countries normalized করার try করছে over the decades rather. Iran was that one country ওরা কখনো এটা করতে দেন, and then Hamas was founded in I think 1987. Right. Hamas was founded in Iran. ঠিক আছে?
Right.
All right. Yes, it operates in Gaza,
right,
but it is from a faction of Iran. Hamasের চার্টারই ছিল death to Israel. That is literally their charter, right? Death to Israel.
Yeah.
So you'll always see Israeli politicians saying we are open to আগে যেটা বলতো last 2 years কথা বলছেন যে we are open to dialogue, but how can we talk to someone who literally wants our death? ঠিক আছে, ইরানের বলা হচ্ছে we will never settle, will never, Israel cannot exist.
But what is one of the reasons why this strike happened, and specifically was because Iran was developing a nuclear program, and the airstrikes
এটা
were
recent history.
was no, but I'm recent বলতেছি because people want to know the recent letter কেন হয়েছে. So what is this Iran nuclear program যেটা around এত কথা, এত strike, এত জিনিসপত্র হয়েছে?
So the Iran's the JCPOA, ওটার আগেও like Iran was basically developing a weapons grade nuclear program, so not just for energy. So but basically, just to give the viewers some idea, so you need like roughly 3.6% uranium enrichment for energy purposes.
আচ্ছা,
Then medical supply জন্য I believe 30% like 30% enrichment, and then to take to weapons grade you need 90% enrichment. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so Iran, if you there's a chart of their enrichment, বুঝছো যে তোর JCPOA আগে থেকে পড়ে, so it's like a acute curve এভাবে উঠতেছে.
আচ্ছা,
Okay, it's going up, and then JCPOA port obviously comes in because of all the sanctions with the UNSC resolutions and everything. And here's the thing: if you're Israel here, and this is not like I'm কিন্তু ওদের justify করতেছে না. Yeah, but এটা যদি ইসরায়েলের পজিশনে থাকো, you have a country that hates you, that supports a group that says death to Israel, and they're developing nuclear weapons. So ওরা ভাববে যে ওকে, ওরা যদি নিউক্লিয়ার ওয়েপন্স করে তাতে আমাদেরকে আসলে ধ্বংস করতে পারবে. So এটা হচ্ছে what we call the realist perspective in international issue, right?
so that's how they sort of justified.
Yeah, so for example, me and you as, let's say, equal capable human beings, we can probably kill each other, right? But if you're not as equally capable as me, I will be less worried about you. But like suddenly you're equally as capable as me, আমি কি করবো? I'm gonna probably try to deter you as much as possible. So that's why recent যে attack হয়েছে, because ওদের Trump হচ্ছে JCPOA থেকে walk out করছে,
Right.
যেটার কারণে হচ্ছে like the US reimposed the previous sanctions on Iran. So ওদের economic recovering যে economy recover করতেছিল ওটাকে একটা hurdle করবো. So obviously people and the Iranian leadership don't like this. So they're like, না আমরা হচ্ছে এখন করবো, uranium enrichment বাড়াবো, কিন্তু বাড়াছে কিন্তু, ঠিক আছে, and actually by like to 60%, right? And like 60% থেকে 90% enrichment করা in like technical and nuclear development terms is actually not that hard. Like with Iran's capabilities একসাথে করতে পারবে. So obviously alarm bells are ringing here, right? But the funny thing is though, the IAEA and even US CIA intelligence ওরা কিন্তু বলছে যে like they still have no proof that Iran was actually going to develop nuclear warheads.
IAEA checks out.
Yeah. But US still made the strike.
That's even a funnier thing.
Yeah. But that's the irony.
Yeah, they still made the strike.
I'll do even a funnier thing.
No.
Israel also has a nuclear program that we don't know for sure.
So yeah, এটা বলতে গেছে. So Israel's আবার nuclear policy to different. Nuclear policy না, মানে their policy regarding how they talk about the nuclear program is different. কোনো leadership এটাকে কিন্তু accept বা deny করে না. খুবই clandestine, খুবই ambiguous. In fact, there's like a Hebrew word for this, which I forgot, which is basically like intentional ambiguity, যেটা বলে,
Right.
or intentionally ambiguous, so that no one knows.
Right.
Why? Because if you don't know something, it's a good way to secure, right? It's secure. But experts who are in the know-how estimate that they have roughly 200 to 400 nuclear warheads, right? So like এটা more or less, I think the intelligence community pretty much everywhere kind of like acknowledged.
Sort of acknowledged. They're one of the 9 states with nuclear.
Well, we don't know. Yes, evidence নাই, but I feel like but there is a consensus kind of among the intelligence community আছে.
এখানে like আরেকটা জিনিস is very important. Like Israel always say যে ইরান হচ্ছে হামাস বা হেজবুল্লাহ বা opposing other groups who opposes them ওদেরকে ফান্ড করে থাকে, right? But if we look back a bit into like even US also agrees to it. So, but if we look back a bit into history, like USA had, let's say, a history of covert CIA operations, for which they themselves funded rebel groups, right? Like most significant, like during Cold War, যখন USSR এবং ধর this Afghanistani rebellion হইলো, right? তখন কিন্তু they funded a lot of like coups or covert operations, and ওইখানে কিন্তু there was this one guy called Zakawi, right? Who later on became one of the founders of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which later on became a faction that formed ISIS, like Islamic State of Iraq and Libya, right? So my question is, if USA have already done it, like why are they like blaming like Iran for doing it.
Because this problem is two-step. The first thing is, US করছে, which was obviously not the right thing, right? এটা থেকে অনেক বাজে ফরওয়ার্ড হয়েছে,
Right.
like
All of the
countries are.
admit যে আছে
It doesn't matter. It was like
mess up, but yeah,
it doesn't matter if they agree or not. The world knows,
Right.
And the thing is, like, ওরা পড়ছে obviously this, মানে not right. Like, you know, এটা হচ্ছে মানে this is what China uses to always say that আমরা actually not interventionist, but the US is like completely interventionist in many cases. But that has nothing to do with the fact that Iran করতেছে. You get what I'm saying? এটা ডাউনফ্লাই করে না কিন্তু এই fact-টা. Right, both of them are doing it.
But ISIS, while at it, they also like made some lone wolf attacks, Bangladesh Kursilo, July 1st and whatnot, right? But why does USA like support Israel so much? Like that's a golden question that everyone wants to know. Okay. Like for everyone who's watching it.
before that I think before I answer that question, I'm sure just to add, you talked about US's support of rebel groups and everything. I think a very important normative argument in IR or in academic terms is one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this is very important. To TOC যখন হামাস অ্যাটাক করে
Right.
on Iraq, oh wow, good job, well done from our Bangladeshi community, যে they are also killing civilians, এটা ইসরায়েলিজ হোক or anyone, innocent মানুষদেরকেই তো মারতেছে, রাইট? আমাদের দেশে আমাদের জিনিসটা কি, অ্যান্ড আই ডোন্ট নো ইফ আমি এটার জন্য নিজে মারা যাবো কিনা, বাট আমাদের দেশে জিনিসটা কি, আমরা সব কিছুকে রিলিজিয়ান বেসিসে
Right.
ইহুদি, খ্রিস্টান, মুসলমান, ওরা নিজেরাও কিন্তু ইহুদি খ্রিস্টান দেখে ফাইট করে না। ইসরায়েলিরাও কিন্তু দে আর নট কিলিং দেম বিকজ দে আর মুসলিমস, দে আর কিলিং দেম বিকজ দে আর প্যালেস্টাইনস, বিকজ ইসরায়েলেও কিন্তু মুসলিমস আছে, প্যালেস্টাইনে কিন্তু জুজ আছে।
Okay.
Even they are not even fighting on the basis of religion. We have a tendency to make this fight.
Nas Daily, a famous content creator, is actually no. It's no. Actually, a Muslim from Israel.
It's no aspects. I mean, this is the thing. Also, like the idea of like what means to be a Muslim. এটা কিন্তু different people will acknowledge in a different way. তুমি বাংলাদেশি মুসলিম হিসেবে তুমি যে practice করো, someone in Pakistan might not practice it the same way. Right. But who's right though? Can you tell me? You probably cannot, right?
I'll tell you something. I was having this discussion with Shubham the other day. We had this march for Gaza, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I think everyone should all be for it. But if you go and ask any of this random person who was there, Judge Apki, কেন এই প্রোটেস্ট হতে, because that ওরা বলবে যে আই ফিল লাইক ইসরায়েলকে মেরে ফেলা উচিত, ধ্বংস করে দেওয়া উচিত, খুবই রিলিজিয়াস একটা আর্গুমেন্ট দেবে। ওরা কিন্তু কখনো সভরেনিটির কথা বলবে না। দ্য ইস্যু ইজ বেসড অ্যারাউন্ড সভরেনিটি।
But what is sovereignty?
Sovereignty is the ability to exercise your independent will on your nation.
It's unliable for someone who has no idea of this.
সভরেনিটি ও সার্বভৌমত্ব আমরা যেটাকে বলি সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে হলো যে নিজস্ব যেই পাওয়ার বা ক্ষমতা, ওটা আমি নিজের মতো খাটাতে পারবো, কারো কোনো ইনফ্লুয়েন্স বা কারো কোনো ডিরেকশন ছাড়া আর কি।
Self determination.
তো তুমি যদি এরকম গাজার এই প্রোটেস্ট যেতে, ওরা বলতো যে ওদেরকে মেরে ফেলা উচিত, ওরা খারাপ। একটা প্যালেস্টাইন কিন্তু এটা বলবে, প্যালেস্টাইন বলবে যে আমরা এটা চাই যেন আমরা এখান থেকে ফ্রি হতে পারি। ওরা কিন্তু রিলিজিয়ান
এটা কিন্তু আমি দেখো, আমি I studied in the United States. আমি ডালফোর্ডে ছিলাম, আমি প্রো প্যালেস্টাইন প্রোটেস্টে গেছি। আর ইনফ্যাক্ট যে কেউ যদি খবর দেখে ইউসিএলএতে আমরা কিন্তু মাইটার খেয়েছি প্রোটেস্টগুলো,
পুরাইলে বাঙালি অবস্থা
মানে পুলিশ এসে বাটন দিয়ে আমাদের গায়ে কত কিছু করছে। রাইট, আই বিন দেয়ার, রাইট। I myself am not a Muslim, but the main narrative in the pro-Palestinian cause is not about religion.
You are said to be a Muslim.
Let's get into this. What is the Israel-Palestine conflict?
But what the hell, another question, right? Why is US and Israel?
We're coming to that, don't worry. But আমি just like ওটার উপর যেটা বলতে চাচ্ছি যে like ওই প্রোটেস্ট আমি কি দেখছি জানো? No, I saw a Nazi flag there. So
কি আমাদের দেশেরটা তো
Nazi flag ছিল তো, right? Yeah, I mean, even like, you know, we have a mutual that we know that works at a certain tobacco company. They said that like, oh, I'm like, you know, I'm going to say it, like Hitler should have finished the job. Yeah, so those kind of things are, it doesn't help.
I think the person was referring to Holocaust.
It's very funny.
And the effect,
It's very funny. The person যে আমাদের দেশে এই নাজি ফ্ল্যাগ উড়েছিল ব্রাউন পার্সন লাইক আস, আজকে যদি হিটলার বেঁচে থাকতো হিটলার ওরেই মেরে ফেলত, ঠিক আছে?
Acha, nah, that's the point. I'm saying that's the point. My point being is like this doesn't help the conversation. It also it doesn't এগুলো কি হয় জানো যে এসব লাইক রিলিজিয়াস কনভোলেন্সি যখন আসে এগুলো হচ্ছে যে প্যালেস্টাইনের মানুষদের অ্যাকচুয়ালি ওদের যে মেজর ডিমান্ডস থাকে ওদের থেকে ফোকাসটা সরাসরি
না আমার বাট আমাকে আচ্ছা লেটস টেক টু পার্টস তুই আমাকে বল ওয়াই ইজ ইউএসএ অ্যাকচুয়ালি সাপোর্টিং ইসরায়েল?
Oh, it's so easy. It's because Middle East ওদের যদি কোনো লাগে
এলাই লাগে Saudi is there, Qatar is there.
No. Saudi is there, Qatar is there, but Saudi and the US don't look eye to eye on a lot of things.
আচ্ছা
But Israel, they do. ঠিক আছে? It's in the best interest long term because a lot of example, let's say, a lot of Israel's enemies যেটা বলে like Iran বল বা অন্যান্য যে গ্রুপসগুলো বল they align very very nicely with the US as well. So recently Ted Cruz who's like a very pro-Israel lobbyist, ও টাকার কার্লসন যেটা হচ্ছে আরেকটা কনজারভেটিভ, হ্যাঁ, সো মোস্ট কনজারভেটিভস আর ইউজুয়ালি প্রো ইসরায়েল, কিন্তু রিসেন্টলি আমেরিকার কনজারভেটিভ পলিটিক্যাল সার্কেল এখন একটা ডিবেট উঠতেছে যে আচ্ছা আমরা এত টাকা কেন খরচ করতেছি ইসরায়েলকে বাহানোর জন্য এতদিন পর বাট ইউনো বলতেছে তো রাইট ফাইনালি বলতেছে আর আমি লাইক সো রেড ক্রুজকে জিজ্ঞেস করছে যে আমরা হচ্ছে $X বিলিয়ন দিকে দিতেছি আমাদের থেকে কী পাইতেছি অ্যান্ড হিস চিন্তা কর, আর ও হচ্ছে ওই টাকার কাউসনকে বলতেছে যে লাইক ও আমাদের ইসরায়েল নিয়ে এত অবসেশন কেন, অ্যান্ড টাকার কাউসন বলছে বিকজ উই গিভ দেম সো মাচ মানি হোয়াট আর উই গেটিং ফ্রম ইট, অ্যান্ড আমি যে টেড ক্রুজের আর্গুমেন্ট দিব দিজ আর বেসিকলি দ্য রিজনস ওয়াই দ্য ইউএস সাপোর্টস ইট, উইচ ইজ নাম্বার ওয়ান আছে ওদের মিলে কমন এনিমিস মিলে, সো যেটা ইসরায়েলকে ওখানে স্ট্রং বানায় এটা আমেরিকার সিকিউরিটি বেটার হবে,
ইটস আ ফরেন পলিসি থিং,
ফরেন পলিসি নাম্বার ওয়ান, মানে পার্টিকুলারলি এটা হচ্ছে রিয়েল পলিটিক আছে দি ইনফেমাস হেনরি কিসিঞ্জার real politic. The second thing is when it comes to intelligence sharing, the United States কিন্তু Israeli infrastructureটাই বানাচ্ছে, যে most of their weapons development, so they
even the drones.
so the US has a very even bigger vested interest to talk to them. Weapon sales এর কথা যদি বলো চিন্তা হয় আর কি, right? Then you will also see that Israel and Taiwan also have a defense like agreement going on in terms of like sales of weapons and stuff. Why is that important? Because to counter China, the US also needs to work with Taiwan, right? So I see align করে গেছে না, হ্যাঁ এইসব কারণে হচ্ছে ইসরায়েল করে সাপোর্ট করে।
আরেকটা আমি রিজন অ্যাড করি, যে রিজনটা একটা নর্মাল মানুষ কখনো বুঝবে না। It has less to do with Jewish people or Zionist people, but more to do with evangelical Christians. যারা এটা দেখবে তাদেরকে আমি বলবো যে একটু লাইক টু লুক আপ হোয়াট ইজ ইভ্যাঞ্জেলিক্যাল ক্রিশ্চিয়ানস। ওরা হচ্ছে ক্রিশ্চিয়ানিটির অনেক সেক্টরস আছে, ডিফারেন্ট ফ্যাকশনস আছে। সো ইভ্যাঞ্জেলিক্যাল ক্রিশ্চিয়ান ইজ আ পার্ট অফ দ্যাট ক্রিশ্চিয়ানিটি। দে হ্যাভ স্ট্রং, ওরকম হয়েছে ইউনো দ্য বিবলিক্যাল এব্রাহামিক রেফারেন্সেসটাকে ইসরায়েলের সাথে অনেকটাকে রিলেট করে, অ্যান্ড ওরা উইদিন ইউএস দে পুশ
the
agenda within the US political state apparatus যে না ওইখানে একটা ইসরায়েলের ল্যান্ড থাকতে হবে, and these evangelical Christians are what makes up your AIPAC, AIPAC,
আচ্ছা
American Israeli Political Action Committee.
it's a
one of the most powerful, strongest
sorry it's not
আচ্ছা
it's
এর
not
থেকেও powerful
powerful যাবে না, it's an influential lobby but not as loyal as influential as he's saying.
আচ্ছা so I'll just get to like the main thing, which is যে before World War II, Jews used to live in Europe, right? Mostly they used to.
You actually have to go back to World War I. You actually have to go to 1890 to be very
Correct. Let's have a very quick recap of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The reason I'm saying very quick recap is because there is so many things to this.
Okay, here are notables. You can explain that timeline. আমি just ওটার আগেও বলি, হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে, because unfortunately most people in Bangladesh they don't read a lot of like religious history যেটা বলো, right? So Islam কিন্তু actually is the newer religion in the world if you look at the timeline in terms of so like you know I think the oldest is Hinduism, and then came Buddhism, and then came the Abrahamic timeline of like Judaism, and then হচ্ছে তোর আসছে Christianity আসছে, Christianity came.
Abrahamic religions were Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Yes, right, they're newer. Yeah. So basically if you read the Old or New Testament যেটা বলে, you'll know the story of how the Jews were driven out of Jerusalem এই এরিয়াটা
promised land.
the promised land whatever by the Ebionites. They were a group of people যারা ওদেরকে ড্রাইভ আউট করছে, রাইট? সো এটার কারণে হচ্ছে এই জেরুসালাম থেকে এত ডিসপার্স হয়েছে, রাইট, টু ডায়াসপোরা হয়ে গেছে, ঠিক আছে? ইনফ্যাক্ট দ্য ফানি থিং ইজ, if you ask someone, আমি যদি তোকে জিজ্ঞেস করি what do you think an average Jew speaks, কি language বল, probably you'll say Hebrew.
No, I think English.
Yeah, it's actually English. Why? Because
In fact, Ukraine, there are a lot of Jews.
yeah, but I'm saying Hebrew is actually not the most spoken language, even though that's what most people think.
Yeah.
Right? Or like
It's also on myth.
it's also the other myth that most Muslims speak Arabic. That is also not true. Like
Yeah.
তো এটা বলতেছি, তো এটার কারণে ডিসপারসেশনটা হয়েছে না, রাইট? সো নাও ইউ হ্যাভ অল দিস Jews that are like all over the world, and একটা মেজর জিনিস, ইউনিক থিং অ্যাবাউট জুডাইজম ইজ ওদের কিন্তু টেম্পল একটাই, ঠিক আছে, যেখানে ওদের স্পিরিটটা আছে, ইয়াওয়ে বলে,
Or Jerusalem.
এটা জেরুসালেম, দ্যাটস দ্য অনলি টেম্পল। আর বাকি যে জিনিস আছে এগুলো সিনাগগ বলে, আর সিনাগগ ইজ নট আ টেম্পল। এখানে গিয়ে হচ্ছে ইউ মিট আদার জুজ, ইউ টক অ্যাবাউট রিলিজন, ইটস মোর লাইক মানে কমিউনিটি গ্যাদারিং অ্যাজ অপোজ টু লাইক অ্যান অ্যাকচুয়াল লাইক যেভাবে লাইক মানুষের নাম আছে, ইটস নট দ্যাট,
Right.
okay? So this is why that region is so important, and why the formation of Israel was so important to the agenda for Jews. এখন I took I to recent data ball, right?
Alif, take us to a quick time.
Yeah, quick time. 1890s, there was this person, I forgot his name, Hegel something.
But yeah, do also talk about the Balfour Declaration.
Yes, I mean, so Hegel something, he's considered to be the father of modern Zionist movement, right? All right. So ও তখন এই মুভমেন্টটাকে তুলতেছে World War I এর পর when Ottoman Empire fell, ঠিক আছে, and British rule at the time claimed ownership of the now land that we know as Israel Palestine, let's just consider that as one land, তখন তোর ওখানে এই যে ওরা ফেরত আসলো, ঠিক আছে, আচ্ছা, you know what, এখন আর এখানে Ottoman Empire নেই, আমরা ফেরত যাই, we're supposed to be there anyways, right? At that time the land was Palestine, the entirety of it was Palestine. তখন
এটাকে প্যালেস্টাইন বলতো,
Palestine,
exactly, not as a state কিন্তু just the region itself.
region itself was Palestine. So ওরা আসলো, listen to it very carefully, post World War I ওরা আসলো, তখন ওইখানে যিনি ছিলেন লর্ড ব্যালফোর অফ দ্য টাইম, হু ইউজ টু গভর্ন ওভার দ্য এরিয়া, ও তখন কি করলো, ও বললো যে ব্যালফোর ডিক্লারেশন, দিস ইজ দি মোস্ট সিগনিফিকেন্ট থিং দ্যাট অ্যাকচুয়ালি চেঞ্জড হিস্ট্রি, যে here we promise
Was that a British territory back then?
there was a British territory because Ottoman Empire আর ছিল before,
Yeah.
so তখনও কি বললো যে হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে here we give this promised land and we reaffirm our assurance or something that this is the home of the Jews or state of Israel, তখনও বলে নাই, ঠিক আছে? ওকে, এখানে একটা জাস্ট a little bit of segue, অনেকে বলে যে লর্ড রথসচাইল্ড অ্যান্ড so on, তখনকার অনেক বড় বিগ বিজনেসম্যান যারা, ওদের এখানে ভেস্টেড ইন্টারেস্টেড ছিল, these are conspiracy theories, we go on. So 1918 World War I শেষ হলো, World War II শুরু হলো কখন, 1939-এ,
Right.
মাঝখানে 20 years, এই 20 years-এর মধ্যে প্যালেস্টাইনে ওই ল্যান্ডের মধ্যে অনেক ডিসপিউট হয়েছে, বিকজ ইম্যাজিন সিম্পলি, আমি তোর বাসায় গেলাম, শুভম বললো যে you know what Alif, you can live in Mashur's house, and you're like, bro, আমি তো বলিও নাই যে থাকতে পারবে, ঠিক আছে, আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডেবল, রাইট? মারামারি হইতেছে, ওই 20 বছরে কিন্তু অনেক এদিক সেদিক পপুলেশন আপ ডাউন হয়েছে, অনেক কনফ্লিক্ট হয়েছে বিটুইন দ্য জুজ অ্যান্ড দ্য অরিজিনাল প্যালেস্টিনিয়ানস দ্যাট লিভ দেয়ার, দেন হলোকস্ট হ্যাপেন্ড, আর তখন পিপল আর লাইক যে দ্য arch for a Jewish state is stronger than ever, we need it to claim a land for themselves, you know what, আমরা এখন ইসরায়েল নিব, আচ্ছা নে, কোনো সমস্যা নেই, দিস ইজ ওয়ে UN partition plan I would say messed up big time. UN partition plan messed up big time. ওরা ম্যাপটাকে এমনভাবে বানাইছে, এক পাশে ইসরায়েল, দুই পাশে প্যালেস্টাইন, মাঝখান দিয়ে ইসরায়েল, কাইন্ড অফ লাইক ইস্ট পাকিস্তান, ওয়েস্ট পাকিস্তান, মাঝখান দিয়ে ইন্ডিয়া, থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট ইট। ফানিলি এনাফ, এখনও যদি তুই প্যালেস্টিনিয়ানদের সাথে কথা বলিস, Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians in West Bank are very different. And in a lot of interviews, West Bank-এর যখন কোয়েশ্চেন জিজ্ঞেস করবো, আমাদের কেন জিজ্ঞেস করতেছে, আমরা তো এখানে থাকি না, just because we're Palestine doesn't mean that we know everything that's going on there, right? That partition plan was very bad. Anyways, মেলো, এই যে এখন ইসরায়েলকে নিউ কান্ট্রি ডিক্লেয়ার করে দিলে, এখন তো আরব ওয়ার্ল্ড খেপে গেছে, একটা মারামারি হইলো,
The 6-day war happened.
না 6 day war পরে
আর একটু পরে,
the invasion of
হ্যাঁ, সো একটা নতুন স্টেটকে সাথে সাথে ধর, একটা স্টেট হু ওয়াজ লিটারালি বর্ন টুডে, ওদেরকে পুরো আরব স্টেট, ফানি না পুরো হাসছে ওয়ার্ডটা, ঠিক আছে? ওই ওয়ার্ডটাতেই যেটা হয় 1948 ইজ কল্ড দ্য নাকবা,
Yeah.
যে
The first comment.
yeah, the first one.
First one.
যখন এই ওয়ারের জন্য অনেক প্যালেস্টাইনস হ্যাড টু মুভ আউট
Yeah.
ডিউরিং দ্যাট ওয়ার, রাইট? যখন ওরা বের হয়ে গেল, এটাকে নাকবা বলে। এই জন্য এখনো বলে দ্য রাইট টু রিটার্ন, দ্য রাইট টু রিটার্ন, UNRW অলওয়েজ বলে দ্য রাইট টু রিটার্ন। হলো কামিং ব্যাক টু 1967 যখন তোর 6 Day War হলো। 6 Day War was a turning point because that's when যেই ল্যান্ডটা দুইজনকে দিয়ে দিছে, ধর লেটস জাস্ট সে 50% হচ্ছে গিয়ে হলো ইসরায়েল, 50% এদিকে, 25% এদিকে প্যালেস্টাইন, 25%। 1967 কি হলো? ইসরায়েল annexation of the West Bank.
Right.
That is the turning point because ও বলছিল Jerusalem is a very important point, right? It's important not only for Jews, it's important for Muslims and Christians. Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Wailing Wall, the temple for them,
Yeah, please, yeah.
yeah. So this was a huge starting point. That land was not in the original land for Israel.
Yep.
এটা কিন্তু illegally annexed. But they will come up with different arguments and very strong arguments as well. That land, the entirety of the land belongs to us in the first place. So, আমরা যেখানে it's not actually occupying them.
And the reason, I mean, we historical reference to mention, of course, is because that is also the narrative that they try to say. Where they're like, this is like, we are God's people and this is promised to us.
By their logic, West Bank, Gaza is also their part.
Right.
যে আচ্ছা, it's good that we are at least giving you this much space, right?
Right.
Sort of a thing. তারপরে 1987 হামাস আসলো, একটা বড় আপরাইজিং হলো। তারপরেই তোর ইন্তিফাদা যেটাকে বলে, ফার্স্ট ইন্তিফাদা 2006 এর সেকেন্ডটা হইলো, গাজা ব্লকেড হইলো। আই উড সে, যদি আমি রিসেন্ট হিস্ট্রিতে আসি, the most important and controversial to a lot of people, to the Muslim world, was the Abraham Accords. Yeah. Eta was very, very, very controversial for the Muslim community. The Abraham Accords was founded, basically Abraham, the Judaism, Christianity, Muslim, এই জন্য Abraham Accords টা আসছে। The Abraham Accords was obviously UAE তে এটা করা হয়েছিল। So UAE seeked to normalize relation with Israel.
Right.
See, over the timeline I mentioned, many countries have reconciled. ঠিক আছে, পারতেছি না। And actually, to be honest, to be fair to Israel, ওরাও কিন্তু হাত বাড়ে, such, you know what, let's end this. It's enough. But broader Muslim community, not your leaders, broader Muslim population do not see it in good eyes. They're illegal. The political leaders are করতেছে।
So, me and Olive had this discussion many times, right? Where, okay, what was one of, like, a situation? So, by the way, for the viewers, when the United Nations was formed, the Israel and Palestine conflict was the first problem they dealt with. And it echono solve korte pare ni.
One of the first resolution.
No, it is literally the first problem, right? The first adaptation, when the UN body first task chilo to.
Actually,
and they couldn't solve it. Yeah. So, Alif once asked me, Jirak, acha, what are the failures here, right? And one of my, যেটা আমি বলি, and it actually like, Alif every course finally, I think, which is like, when I say the Muslim world, I mean the people, I mean the Muslim leadership or the Arab leadership abandoned the Palestinians.
Name some specific countries.
The UAE. The UAE.
See, তুই যদি একটা নর্মাল বাঙালির সাথে কথা বলিস রাস্তায় গিয়ে, ভাই দেখেন ইহুদিদের খ্রিস্টানরা কত সাপোর্ট করতেছে, আমাদের মুসলিম ভাইদের মধ্যে কোনো বন্ধুত্ব নাই। To be honest, they are right.
Right.
See, a lot of people, you go to comment section, you go to international commentary, you'll see that the Muslim world is absolutely failing to do the job it first intended to do. But ulta ki korteche ekhon normalize kor. What is normalization? Visa embassies open korteche, visa restrictions komai diteche.
And the problem hocche ki, every step of normalization that happens is like a slap in the face to the Palestinian business.
Right.
কারণ এই যে ইসরায়েল যে এত সিকিউরিটি হাঙ্গ্রি থাকে, is because of that invasion that he talked about year পর। ইনভেশনটা কারা করছে? The Arab countries, right? Rightly so in many ways, right? But you failed. You failed.
আর ওরা সবসময় বলে যে তোমরা আমাদেরকে বারবার অ্যাটাক করছো over the years.
I also want to mention, like, since you also mentioned, did the UN fail?
Oh, that's a harm.
Like,
you only feel here, or do you mean in general?
I mean, United Nations.
Yeah.
The concept is to stop wars or violence or sectarian conflict
Sure.
happen.
To maintain international peace.
Peace and security. Literally, there's Article 1.
And yet, they were able, I think in a way, they couldn't bring leaders together or the major people, stakeholders together to solve this problem. And I can give more examples.
Of course.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So, two questions for everyone who's watching. What is the United Nations? And no, it's important. A lot of people do not know what is the Security Council and the veto powers and whatnot, right? And why did they fail to resolve this crisis?
So Ali's favorite question. But UN এর বাংলাতে কি ওটা বললো? জাতিসংঘ।
জাতিসংঘ. The UN is the successor to the League of Nations that was formed after World War I. আচ্ছা ভাই এখন আবার but the League of Nations had its flaws. ওইটা নিয়ে আরেকটা এপিসোড করা যাবে। সো ভাবলো যে ভাই এটা বাদ, World War II তো হয়েই গেছে, নিশ্চয়ই it failed. আমরা এখন United Nations জানি, it was formed in 1945 with 50 states at the time that signed and eventually অন্যরা আসা শুরু করছে. Its main job, it has 5 main job, which is to maintain international peace and security, to ensure that domestic matters of any country are protected, to maintain coordination and balance and harmony between states and whatnot. So basically help the world, right? Now,
Tell about its parts like the General Assembly, the
so UN has 6 main organs. First is the General Assembly. জাতীয় অধিবেশন যেটাকে বলে ইউএন এর, সিকিউরিটি কাউন্সিল নিরাপত্তা পরিষদ, তারপরে হচ্ছে গিয়ে হলো আইসিজে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কোর্ট অফ জাস্টিস, সেক্রেটারিয়েট যেটা হচ্ছে পুরো অর্গানাইজেশনের মেম্বার্সরা, তারপরে হচ্ছে গিয়ে হলো ইকোসক ইকোনমিক অ্যান্ড সোশ্যাল কাউন্সিল, এটা একটা অঙ্গ জাতিসংঘের মধ্যে যেটা দ্বারা আরও অনেক কিছু করা হয়, ঠিক আছে।
বাকি এই যে এজেন্সি আছে না ওগুলোকে কোঅর্ডিনেট,
বাকি ইউএনডিপি হু যেগুলো ওরা ওদের কোঅর্ডিনেট, লাস্ট একটা আছে ট্রাস্টিশিপ কাউন্সিল, এটা এখন আর pretty much useless.
right, or that is actually useless. Yeah.
Tell me about the P5s in UNSC.
আচ্ছা, সো ইউএনএসসি এর মেম্বারশিপটা কিভাবে গঠন করা হয়েছে, যে অ্যাকচুয়ালি ইনিশিয়ালি 9 জন ছিল, পরে আস্তে আস্তে এটাকে বাড়ায় 15 জন করছে। এই মুহূর্তে নিরাপত্তা পরিষদে, আমি পার্টটা বাংলায় বলছি যেন সবাই বুঝতে পারে, নিরাপত্তা পরিষদে 15 জন মেম্বার আছে, ঠিক আছে। 15 জন মেম্বারের মধ্যে 5 জন মেম্বারকে আমরা বলি পার্মানেন্ট মেম্বার্স, ওরাদের মেম্বারশিপ কখনো চেঞ্জ হয় না। তো নন পার্মানেন্ট মেম্বার্স কারা, বাকি 10 জনকে 2 ইয়ার বেসিসে চেঞ্জ করে বেসড অন রিজিয়ন, এশিয়া প্যাসিফিক রিজিয়ন, ওয়েস্টার্ন ইউরোপ রিজিয়ন অ্যান্ড সো অন। এই জন্য তুই দেখবি যে কিছুদিন পর 2 বছর পর মেম্বার্স চেঞ্জ হতেছে, কিন্তু P5 রয়ে গেছে। এই P5 কারা? ইউএসএ, ফ্রান্স, ইউকে, চায়না, রাশিয়া। এরা কেন P5? The winners of World War II. They feel like we have a claim, rightfully so, যে এখন আমরা এটা, ঠিক আছে। See, আমি যে জিনিভার কথা বলি, to this day, they have the ultimate veto power. Veto power হচ্ছে যখনই জাতিসংঘে কোনো রেজলিউশন, সো না আমি একটু একটু হিসাব করি, this is because I get generally very angry when people say the UN does not work.
It works.
It works because
It works for humanitarian committee.
exactly my point. যে UN এর দুইটা কাজ আছে, একটা হচ্ছে হিউম্যানিটেরিয়ান এফর্ট, আর একটা হচ্ছে কনফ্লিক্ট প্রিভেনশন। I had the very good privilege of meeting with the Deputy High Commissioner of Human Rights Council last year. I asked her this question. Geneva-তে. Because তখন Human Rights Council এর annual assembly চলছে. Anyways, so তখন I asked her this same question, is UN failure? বলে no. I mean then what is? বলে যে political will. Let's say Shubham is UN here, you and I are fighting. The most Shubham can do, UN at the end of the day, and I quote, bold lock, caps lock, mediator, it's a mediating body. Shubham can at most try to help Jacek. Guys, you guys try to solve it.
Yeah, but যদি help না চাও তোমরা, আমি কি বলি?
If you guys don't want help, একবার Kofi Annan actually walked out of a peacekeeping mission because he was like, I'm done with this, I'm walking out.
And last thing to add on, so এই যে US তো pro Israel, right? But এই US এর ভিতরে যে এত dissension হচ্ছে না, like there's a lot of protests in the US, right? By a lot of its own people, a lot of in fact like pro-Palestinian Jews, right? Jews for peace যারা বলে, এগুলো কিন্তু প্রোটেস্ট হচ্ছে না। I also had the pleasure of meeting the executive director of UNRWA US, right? সে হচ্ছে, this is when all this যে visa cancellations were happening, ঠিক আছে। সে হচ্ছে মিডল অফ নিউ ইয়র্ক সিটি, মিড টাউন ম্যানহাটনে, আমরা ছিলাম ওখানে কনফারেন্সে। সে হচ্ছে 3000 স্টুডেন্টের সামনে বলছে, don't stop the fight.
Don't stop the fight.
Yeah, like হ্যাঁ, so in that sense সে তো এটা like একটা বড় একটা winger, like if not at this time the most important body in the UN, also the most underfunded, right? So এখানে এই যে এই resistance, right, to fight for justice, এটাও কিন্তু একটা important element
Definitely.
that allows like
আমি দুইটা জিনিস দিয়ে শেষ করবো আসুর। ফার্স্ট জিনিস হচ্ছে গিয়ে হলো যে তোর ওয়াই ইউএন ইজ নট এন্টায়ারলি মানে এটা যে ইউজলেস না কেন, সিম্পলি বিকজ আমি যেটা বলছি পলিটিক্যাল উইলের কথা, এখন পলিটিক্যাল উইল যদি না থাকে এটা কখনো কেউই চেঞ্জ হতে পারবে না। আর যদি কেউ চায় লেটসে আমি আর তুই ফাইট করতেছি তোর বাসের ভিতরে, আমি আর তুই ফাইট করতেছি, শুভম তোর বাসের ভিতরে ঢুকলো, উইল ইউ লাইক দ্যাট?
Of course not.
বিকজ শুভম কেন তোর বাসায় ঢুকবে? তোর ফাইট তো আমার সাথে। অ্যান্ড ইউএনস জব কি, ওদের প্রিন্সিপাল কি? টু প্রোটেক্ট সভরেনিটি। সি ইট ইজ দিস ইন্টারেস্ট, এটা কিন্তু খুবই টেকনিক্যাল নুয়ান্সড একটা অ্যাপ্রোচ যে ইউএন ইজ অ্যাকচুয়ালি ডুইং হোয়াট ইজ সাপোজ টু বি ডুইং। তাহলে তো ইউএন সব দেশে গিয়ে গিয়ে মানুষকে যুদ্ধ দিয়ে থামাই দিত, বাট নো বডি ওয়ান্ট দ্যাট। তাহলে রোহিঙ্গাদেরকেও এসে ইউএন গিয়ে বের করে দিত, ইসরায়েল প্যালেস্টাইনের মধ্যে গিয়েও বের করে দিত। অ্যান্ড মাই লাস্ট পয়েন্ট ওয়াজ যে সভরেনিটি, এটা লাস্ট পয়েন্ট ওয়াজ যারা বলে ইউএন ফেইলার, আই উড most people know, for those of us who don't know, the US 7th Fleet was getting ready to launch an attack on us during 16th December on 1971. USSR vetoed it at the time because আমাদের তখন খুবই সোশ্যালিস্টিক টাই ছিল, সোশ্যালিজমের টাই ছিল ওদের সাথে, ইস্টার্ন ব্লকের টাই।
I think everyone believed that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was a communist. He in fact had a Bakshal party. That was a communist party.
Principles was one of them was socialism. So if you look at us, if you look at Bangladesh, the reason we are here today could have been due to that veto power.
ওই ভিটো পাওয়ার জন্য কিন্তু লাইক মানে দ্য ওয়ার্ল্ড আছে লাইক ওকে
In fact, Bhutto actually tore down a famous
আমাদের the birth of this country's history, the immediate birth in fact, like the transition যে ইস্ট পাকিস্তান বাংলাদেশ, এটা কিন্তু ইউএন এর সাথে অনেক হেভিলি টাইড, অনেক হেভিলি টাইড। সো লাইক I think unfortunately we don't know our own history yet properly, right? And প্রতি 10 বছর পর প্রতি হিস্ট্রি বলে
I would tell people who's watching, especially if you are young, প্লিজ আজকাল যে সব নিউজ আউটলেট বের হয়েছে যে একটা শর্ট হেডলাইন দিয়ে দিবে, দে আর ভেরি গুড, না
bite-sized news.
bite size news, they are very good, না front page, they're very good definitely, but they're also not very good.
Why are you nodding?
Of course, because you didn't let me finish, they're also not very good. I talk to some of the younger kids that I know, স্যার দেখছেন, আয় তুমি কিভাবে জানো? ও আমি তো এই হেডলাইন পড়ে নিউজ শেষ। আচ্ছা,
ট্রু।
And some also has to do with the attention span that it's the generation.
No. Okay.
Not everyone is like.
No, I agree. ঠিক আছে, bite size news ভালো in the sense like it caters to a bigger demographic, but I'm sorry, unfortunately
It lacks info.
it doesn't inform you enough, and মানে you're not a journalist for giving a bite size news. Journalists are with this field অনেক
they take sources from newspaper and make it into a
No, but you're not a journalist, you're a recycler.
হ্যাঁ তুই কি অত নিচে দেখছিস সোর্স, এটা সোর্স?
হ্যাঁ আমি এটাই বলছি।
These people who go to these vices and they're too lazy to look up those things.
Yes, but anyway, main point যেটা Alif was trying to get at was to like এসব জিনিস ইনফর্ম করার জন্য তোমার বাইট সাইজ নিউজ পড়লে হবে না, ইউ হ্যাভ টু অ্যাকচুয়ালি ইনভেস্টিগেট, ইউ হ্যাভ টু রিড, অ্যান্ড দেন অলসো লাইক তোমার ইংলিশের ভোকাবটা একটু মোটামুটি ভালো থাকতে হবে, বিকজ যখন একটা নিউজ সোর্স বলে যে দে অ্যালিজেডলি ডিড দিস, এটা মানে না কিন্তু ওরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি করছে। অ্যালিজেডলি কিন্তু খুবই একটা বাজওয়ার্ড তোমার আর্টিকেল হয়, লাইক মাশরুর অ্যালিজেডলি স্ল্যাপ Alif. Does that mean you did it? No, it's this like that's the rumor I heard, right? And you're a legal student, you know that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so in the case of geopolitics or UN's failure or success, like my final words is, if you really want to judge that, take the time and effort to actually see for yourself, understand for yourself, তোমার নিজের ব্রেন দিয়ে ঘেরে ঘেরে দেখো যে লাইক ওর সাকসেস টা কিনা।
Right, I want to end the episode with a very religious discussion, right? Simple. We had a lot of religious talk, like I see in the world there's so much like religious divide, like religion or jonno juddho and whatever. Probably that's the perception, but like every religious book says that there would be this final war, right? In Muslim, you know the Dajjal. In Islam, they have this Dajjal is gonna come, Imam Mahdi, and all that, right? In Hinduism, they also have like God will take the avatar of Kalki, and they are going to have this final war as well. Even Jews believe like in Jerusalem, a Messiah will appear, and there would be this final war, final confrontation, same for Christians as well, the battle with Satan. So I feel like somewhere down the line, there is a lot of similarities if we tend to look deep and understand it, that there is a lot of similarities between religions, but it's just that আমরা always উপর জিনিসপত্র দেখি, like we don't go that deep, like he mentioned, যে এখন তো আরো উপর জিনিসপত্র দেখি. So I would recommend to anyone who's watching that, if we do a bit of research, we'll understand things a bit better.
Right? You're reading the Quran, if you are confused about an act, আমি যখন কোরআন শরীফ পড়ি, I look it up. একটা আয়াতকে you can literally interpret it in infinite ways.
Right.
Yeah. So there's that.
But also, কি যেন বলতে গেছিলো?
That goes for any scriptures.
Yeah, any scripture as well. But also, like, not all religions have a final war. Buddhism does a yeah. Also, I understand what you're trying to say. I think the main thing that people it's not the issue of whether the religion, it's the issue of people, how they misconstrue religion. So I'm at okay, this is gonna sound very interesting. I'm at like Buddhism or Islam at a similarity way. So Islam has jihad, right? But not the way people think about jihad. Like what is the main jihad? Tomar inner jihad, the one with yourself. That is the main jihad.
Right. Or the violence that people perceive.
Yeah, outward jihad যেটা বলে আর কি English, because আমি the poor person.
This jihad is the jihad you fight
within yourself, right? So this is like, to let go of worldly desires যেটা বলে. So Buddhism is a bit similar, to let go of your desires as well, to like, become selfless. This is a similarity most people don't think about, but the point I'm trying to get at is like most religions, if you read it like could be without any influence, just at academic texts, it's actually way more peaceful than most people realize, right?
Right.
In like this idea that in a lot of Western countries like Poland, Islam is a violent religion. Our first counter ki bole, what is the first line in the Quran? God is the most gracious and the most merciful. Right. But the irony, then I'd be like, but if you read Greek literature, gods of wrath are gods of war are.
Right.
So Islam doesn't introduce Allah as like a god of wrath. Yeah. So unfortunately, we as people have failed.
Right.
And we misconstrue a lot of these hadiths. So there's way more commonality than people think.
So I think that this was a good session. Like we three nerds out here try to explain as much geopolitics and a bit of religion as well, and drove in a bit of philosophy as well, as much as possible. And
I'll finish with an anecdote.
Yeah, so Alice is going to finish with an anecdote, and with that, you're wrapping this up.
A professor once told me, since we are talking about geopolitics, আমরা সবসময় বলি যে I don't care about politics. আমি রাজনীতি নিয়ে না. The professor told me, you might not care about politics. Politics definitely cares about you. And everything that goes around the world, be it domestic politics or international politics, will inevitably affect you. This is the same reason, just think of it, আজকে আমরা মোজো খাচ্ছি, কোক না খেয়ে. So yes, politics affects us in ways we cannot imagine.
Thanks, guys, and I'm looking forward to drink a mojo after this episode. With that, thanks, Candid.